This is the Cloud Security Today podcast, where leaders learn how to get cloud security done. And now your host, Matt Chiodi.
Most people think recruiting is about filling roles. But what if the real problem is not anyone knowing how to tell their story? Today's guest, Michael Piacente, has spent his career at the intersection of technology, leadership, and talent. From early days in IT operations and cloud infrastructure to co-founding Hitch Partners, he's helped define what the modern CISO role actually looks like. What makes Michael different isn't just his resume, it's his perspective. He saw early on that the gap wasn't technical skill, it was translation, the ability for leaders to explain what they do, why it matters, and where they're going next. And in a world where the CISO role is still evolving, that gap has real consequences. In this episode, we get into career inflection points, burnout signals, and why the security community might be the only one that still shows up for each other when it matters most. This is a conversation about more than jobs. It's about identity, storytelling, and what it really takes to navigate a career in security today. Let's get into it. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You as well. This is fun.
I wanted to dig a little bit into your background. You spent the first decade of your career in IT operations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what pulled you away from being an operator into executive search, and what did you see that made you want to stay?
Yeah, you're right. I actually started in the enterprise storage world in the VMS days, VAX 2100s, and I worked for a storage company, enterprise storage company that owned some of the original RAID patents. I worked with some of the original computer scientists in RAID. And that was a cool way to start, which launched, a lot of those folks left, or a couple of those folks left to go start in the storage area network phase, if you remember that. And then they got into the data center operations and infrastructure. And I joined them, was a company called Sitesmith, and then I was a co-founder of a company called OpSource, but all in the infrastructure and data center operations space. And it was really cool because I got a front seat as cloud was being born. I was also one of the early ones in the data centers, like, this cloud thing is not going to go anywhere, right? So this is the part of the podcast where you should listen to none of my advice because I clearly am wrong about those big technology shifts. But basically a personal situation. I was, wanted to be a better dad. I was traveling probably 70% of the time, younger kids, and data center ops had not been automated into the cloud yet. And so it was follow the sun type of things. And I was just traveling a lot for teams. And we had put key members of teams within a stone's throw away from data centers to help them with their admin, from networking to database to program management. And I actually realized, quite frankly, that I was actually better at offering guidance and help to others than focusing on my own kind of career advancement and climbing the ladder. I had no intention of climbing the ladder. I just sort of liked my lane. I ended up being pretty good at sort of watching others succeed and kind of helping them with their own brands. And I was good at understanding sort of the balance between people's highly technical skill set and how they explain their skill set to the business and to customers. And I was watching it front row seat of watching the original database administrators and others really struggle with that. So strangely, I was not good at it myself, but I realized that I actually could help others. And it just so happened that a good friend of mine was starting a finance and accounting executive search firm and wanted to start an IT practice. I'm like, well, I don't know anything about recruiting, and they didn't know anything about IT. So I figured this is a good marriage. And 10 years I spent with them building like a family. We had built it all together. It was super fun. And then I realized getting into the recruiting business that like the recruiting space had nowhere to go but up. I thought IT had bad processes and broken processes until I got into recruiting, and I was like, whoa. It was terrible accountability with communication. We call that ghosting now. We actually have a term for it now. It was just a lack of thoughtful calibration. And I think most importantly, what I was disappointed was that no one was really telling a story. The candidates weren't telling a story of who they were and who they could be and who they were, where they came up from. And the clients were really having a hard time telling a story of what they're looking for. If that sounds familiar, it hasn't changed, right? Everyone was kind of following a spec. They were very linear. Even though technology enabled a lot of this, especially during the SaaS kind of implementations, it's still a human behavior that was driving it. And, in the end, people make the difference, but no one was telling a story. And so I really enjoyed working on CIO type of roles and everything up and down that layer. But I ended up switching over to CISO. I can tell that story for another time, but we started noticing that CISOs were a new brand, specifically around the product and application, and hence the idea to kind of discover the modern CISO. Joined with a great partner of mine, my partner today, Brett, and we started building Hitch Partners. And it was impressed upon us that there was a common theme that no one knew what these people did, what their capability was, and how they were going to be paid. But I noticed that there was this common sort of mission among the community. I really kind of fell in love with the CISO community, the security community. There was a ton of camaraderie, brothers and sisters getting together, a sense of fighting the common enemy. And I wanted in, right? I kind of hear and speak even today with, dozens of CISOs on a weekly basis and these security leaders, and they really need help and they need guidance. They're in pain. A lot of them have never looked for a role before. This is all new muscles. And they've been busting their butts for 15, 20 years only to find out that time is running out on their next job search. And what I find is like no one's there to help them except for the community. And that's super depressing at times, but also extremely empowering at other times to know that there's a whole community behind you. And I just wanted to be part of that community. So that's what kind of has continued to keep me to stay. And now the community has been fairly bifurcated and splintered off. But the sense of community, all these different Slack channels and common ways of helping one another is pretty cool to watch. So it's been awesome. It's been an awesome journey so far.
I want to go back to one thing you said a couple minutes ago that caught my attention. And that is you said that in your role as an IT operator, you realized you were traveling a ton and you wanted to make a change for your family, right? You wanted to be a better dad. Maybe talk a little bit about just like what were, because I think this is super helpful. We talk a lot about like burnout, CISO burnout, things like that. And I recently just took a 45-day sabbatical, right? Which I will do a podcast on eventually, but maybe not. I don't know. I did a LinkedIn post.
Want to hear that.
People want to hear it, right? Yes, but there were signals that I saw like leading up to that led me to eventually take that time off. But I'm curious for you, like what were maybe like one or two signals other than the fact that maybe your kid was calling you not by your first name instead of dad? That's a joke, but hopefully not. But I have heard people tell me, I've had guests tell me that was like a signal when their kid was like, John, like, it's nice to see you. But no, what were like maybe one or two of those signals for you that like, hey, something's got to change? Yeah.
Well, first of all, if you think about technology, there was no Zoom. There was no iPhone. There's no smartphones then. I'm really dating myself here, but 2004 99 to 2003 was when I was kind of in the high executive level, kind of managing. I was kind of kicking out of my coverage. I was a young, I guess 30-something-year-old VP. Really trying to learn business at the same time, how to learn how to be a dad, and doing both fairly poorly. So I knew I had to focus on one or the other, and it cost me a lot, to be honest, personally. And things are better now, but it was a really rough time. And so I think just technology really helped. It wasn't helping because it was barely cell phones and no video, and so you felt a sense of disconnection, and not only a disconnection, but also a disconnection from my own community, where not being in the school, and when I was home, I was all in, right? It was like just overloading on volunteering for this, doing this sports thing, coaching this, doing that. And it was just like sort of burning the candle at both ends. And it was very unhealthy. I gained a lot of weight, and I was working out. So it was like, I was like a big bulky dude. And it was like, I was like, well, this isn't going to be good for me. Stress level was there. And data center operations back then was highly, highly stressful, still is, I'm sure. But, there were no automation tools. You had to do everything by hand. It was all operator run. So yeah, I learned a lot. Going through it a little bit right now, not in the same personal situation, but I'm traveling a lot, 60, 70% of the time. But luckily I have, family life a little bit more balanced, and older kids, of course, too.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important because I think as we mature in our careers, there are certain things we learn to, well, hopefully we learn to watch certain signals. And as we get older, hopefully we get better at recognizing those signals earlier and we can put some things in place, community, relationship, things like
Yeah.
that. I think it's really important. This is one thing I hear a lot from listeners who are more junior, earlier in their career, that they're curious. That's why I ask this question to my guests a lot. And I appreciate you being transparent about that. So
Yeah. I think it's hard to learn how to be an adult at the same time. It's at the same time you're learning how to be excellent at your job. I think those two things in balance and harmony are very difficult for anyone, really. I've seen 60-year-olds have hard time with it, but specifically those in their late 20s, early 30s. At the same time, by the way, the drug is, you're always chasing the next challenge. You're making a good amount of money for the first time, and you're not thinking about these are your highest potential earning years, but it slips away real quickly. So the months and the years start blending together. So yeah, I'm acutely aware of it when I'm talking to others and kind of listening to their balance, and they're like, I want to go for this job, and it's like, let me just be the old father figure for a moment and talk to you about balance, right? I have all these young dads and moms that they're like, I want to take this role, right? I'm like, have you thought about what I mean? It's my role. So I'm like, not trying to talk them out of it, but also like, have you thought about this balance thing? And they're like, I just want it. I'm like, okay, but this is what it's going to mean. And having gone through it before and having sacrificed, I definitely take that tone with them to say, don't jump into this, right? Just because you think it's the best. There'll be another one.
Mm. I think that's what makes you good, right? You're willing to potentially put something that you would get paid for. Maybe it's not that one. You put the individual above the role. I've always appreciated that about you. The one thing I'd also say is that, and this is what I appreciate. We'll get to the research here in a minute, but I think you approach the market differently than someone who kind of grew up purely as a recruiter. And so my question for you is like, how does it change how you approach it, right? You came up through an operator. How does that approach how you
Yeah.
read the market versus somebody who came up purely as a recruiter?
Yeah, there's a couple things here. Go through it. First of all, before I was an operator, before I was in that space, I was also a history major. So in fact, I'm a pretty big history junkie. And there's a lot to learn from history. And technology is one big history cycle. It's just repeating itself over and over again with billions of dollars in marketing, coming up with new concepts and new nomenclatures, but it's actually the same kind of approach. Of course it evolves. The technology, AI is something we haven't seen as an example, but some of the concepts around AI are the same thing we were doing back in my VMS days, my VAX days, right? So same human problem, same goals to be productive, to build something great, to make more money, to be existing, but a new technology to do it. And I guess coming from kind of more of the operation side, because I played sort of a role, operation and sales, right? That's what we did back then. And my approach has always been to just sort of listen to the client and also to hold them accountable, right? So very customer focused, but also very acutely aware that the customer is not always right. I'll say that carefully, but that data is the thing that it's not my emotion, it's not my ego or anything. It's the data I can put in front of them. So we have this process that I established when I first started. We call it interviewing the interviewers now, where we interview the entire executive team of the company before we actually start introducing real humans to the process. ITI is a big thing for us. It's a mandate for every single search. We really want to understand the story behind the search. And it actually goes back to my first story when I was first recruiting for my friend's company. I was literally like my fourth day. And again, they were finance and accounting. So they were going in to do a CFO search for a small Mountain View based biotech, kind of tech company. And we all go in and I'm just really quiet, which is very unusual, by the way. And I'm sitting there listening and they're talking about the finance stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, Michael here, he's going to be doing the IT search. And so I hung around, did a couple of questions. We all left. And then the next day, that was a Thursday, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I just went back to the client and just started interviewing everyone because I was an IT guy. And I'm like, this is the problem. So my boss calls my friend, he's like, where the hell are you? I'm like, I'm at the client site. He's like, why? I'm like, well, I'm interviewing everyone about the role, about the CIO role it was a head of IT. And he's like, that's not how you do it. We did the discovery meeting. They come back and you just make a boatload of phone calls and then I'll go get some people. I was like, yeah, but there was a little bit too much nuance in this. I understand it from the inside out. He's like, whatever. And so that's just sort of then the way that I focused. And when I first started, I'm still today, competing against recruiters who are just like significantly more experienced in the craft of recruiting, but they sort of lack the understanding of the problem. And it wasn't because I was more technical. I certainly, knowing that the language certainly helps, knowing the nomenclature hurt, but they just didn't want to put in the work.
I love that. So the subtext here for listeners is it's important if you're going to work with a recruiter to interview your recruiter because they are
Yes.
not all created equal. That's my takeaway.
Yes. Yeah. And just find out what makes them tick,
Well, before we get into the numbers, maybe let's just zoom out a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
why do you do this research? It's very well followed now, but why do you do it?
Yeah, it's actually humbling how well it's followed. We didn't think. Yeah, so the history here was when we first started working and building Hitch Partners, the concept around it was that there was this category of individual that we sort of discovered by accident. We were starting to get calls from, when I was my last firm, we started getting calls for CIO searches, and they would say, hey, we need a CIO because we've lost control of our software licensing cost. That was like 2009. So we started Hitch focused on that, but then we realized that no one knew how this product engaged, application engaged, former software developer moved into the security world was paid. And so we started asking all of our friends that we were close with, these kind of initial ProdSec, AppSec type of leaders that are all CISOs now, by the way, or founders. And they were blowing us away. We're like, this is like 3 to 5 times more than what Radford is saying, right? And so so we started building. First, it was like 50 people, and it was 100, and now we have close to 700 people on average that participate and give us their data unanonymized, and it goes out anonymized, of course. But one of the things that we've been getting lately is like people want us to share, like you said, why do you do it and where it started. So that's where it started. We were kind of astounded by the numbers, but we were also more astounded by the story behind the numbers. So it's not really that interesting that CISO compensation went up 3% year over year for the last couple of years. It is interesting if you put it in context of what's going on in the macroeconomic environment and with AI and with everything else and customer engagement and adding all the other scope things. We wanted to tell that story, and we'll continue to tell the story of the numbers. So we look at the data. The team looks at the data. We basically go away. We all come back with what's the story we hear. It's a long process. And what's the story if there's no story in that number and we can't figure it out, then we don't tell that story.
So give us the TLDR. What's the biggest change in the CISO seat over the last, call it 3 years? Did you say?
Well, I think there's, well, first of all, the thing that's changed the most is the scope. Right? The scope from when we started the company to now is almost unrecognizable. I mean, there's evidence of what it used to look like, but the acceleration of the scope, both from a technical perspective, but also operationally and strategic, right? When we first started, it was very rare to see a CISO, maybe at the large financial services, but most everyone else did not have a seat at the table. The pandemic changed that, changed the game for the CISO, right? It was the single greatest moment in history for the young CISO career, young CISO history, I should say. It became the sort of chief look around the corner officer is what we call it. It was the CISO that deployed remote worker safety. It was the CISO that got into the product side and enabled massive product development. It was the CISO that made sure that we could communicate with ease and make sure these tools were. And by the way, they did it overnight. And what it showed is that the CISO was the only one prepared to be able to do that. No disrespect to the CIO, but the CIO for most of the time was not around they were there for availability. They were not there for helping to secure this massive deployment. And at the same time, when SaaS was at its, kind of height, so to speak, and right before AI comes out and becomes the thing, the CISO really elevated themselves, and to the point where now we're seeing CISO roles, almost all of our CISO roles have the IT component underneath, not reporting to the CIO. And so that's been a big change. Plenty of companies still have wonderful CIOs. I think it's great, but it's made an equal, right? Before it was a report, almost always a direct report under the CIO. Now they're very much equals in many cases. For a modern company, maybe less than 10 years old, they're hiring a CISO before they hire a CIO, almost always. And so that's the big one. I think the other one, so the increase in scope, taking over IT, taking over things like infra, being the AI strategy, a risk strategist for the company as the CISO, that's another one that's been bolted on. I think the biggest movement that I saw was the next gen movement, right? So this has been the coolest thing, right? And I've kind of dubbed this the year of the next gen. Selfishly, we have like 3 or 4 events that are around this. One coming up in New York on May 13th. That's my plug with Ballistic and the Phil Venables and that group. But what's clear is next gens are builders. They're not just communicators, right? So the market values the security leadership on exposure to technical problem solving, not on compliance or not on the org chart. And that's what the comp survey and everything else has told us, right? So if you've heard Joe Sullivan's brilliant piece on the year of runtime, so we've moved from shift left to just running, right? Static is dead. AI apps are now dynamic. Your chatbots are moving to agents. And if an agent is compromised or starts hallucinating, you have no time to react with traditional software. And so these apps have to intercept the runtime before they can commit to a database or a cloud environment. And so, okay, that's all great and crazy, but how does that translate? Well, it translates to product security, knowing and understanding ProdSec at its core. And essentially, if you think about it, what runtime means to me is that it's that space where the CISO and the CTO meet, where product and security meet for the first time ever. It's always been there, but never before like this. And hopefully this is where the next gen, it's why the next gen was built the way they were. And hopefully they're all ready to step up. But you can't just approve a piece of software now and then walk away. You've got to monitor it in what it's doing while it's doing it, right? It's a very different game now. And so that makes the security leaders in these environments a totally different approach to how you're hiring, right? And what you're hiring for.
I want to go back to real quick, Mike. I want to interrupt you because you said something that I want to go back to. You said that the scope of the CISO role has changed, right? It's more technical, and a lot of times it includes IT. And I know that's the case. I have a number of colleagues right now who were just recently, maybe the CIO left or something like that. And guess what? They gave it to the CISO, right?
Yeah.
So one of the right? Congratulations, right? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, but this gets to one of the more, I think, subtle but important findings in the report. And that was around how low confidence in evaluating technical depth, right? Only 16% of CISOs are highly confident in a recruiting team's ability to assess technical depth, right? So from your perspective, what does it actually look like in practice? Like, where do hiring processes tend to break down when companies try to assess modern security talent? And then we will get to the next gen piece because I think that's awesome. But tell me about that first.
Well, I guess the first thing on that is it wasn't subtle at all to us. Because the other way to say it is 84% don't trust the internal recruiting process. 16%, I'm a glass is half empty sometimes and glass is half full sometimes. But yeah, I mean, assessing technical depth at an internal or even external recruiting team measure is terrible, right? It's just terrible. It's hard, right? This is not a marginal number, right? This is a near universal experience that everyone's having. And it's consistent across public and private, across all company sizes. And look, you have to put it in perspective, right? Like, internal recruiting teams are very good generalists. My wife did it for many, many years after we actually met in our previous company, and she went on to be an internal recruiter for a couple of huge organizations, and she had averaging like 28 searches on average, right? And they're all over the place, right? You're constantly playing catch up, and recruiters are doing the whack-a-mole thing, and so they become fairly and by the way, not too different from an incident manager, just to tie the two together. But then you get to something like a CISO search, right? And it's just different, right? Maybe you've done it once. We run into that sometimes internally, like, hey, I did a CISO search. We did one back in 2020 for my last CISO, and that's great, right? But every CISO search is nuanced, right? Every single one of our searches is different. It may have some of the same components, but something like a ProdSec engineer turning into a CISO is very different than an IT person turning into a CISO, very different than an AI architect turning into a CISO. I mean, forget about using LinkedIn for this stuff. This is unlike any other technical role that they've ever come across. And hopefully they're not treating it like any other position in their role. And I'm learning every day, right? So it takes some time to do these very different roles. It takes the nuance. It takes companies sometimes 10, 15, 20 interviews to figure out what they really want. And so what's happened in the security recruiting world is like you probably can assimilate with this, Matt, but 7 rounds of interviews before anybody has the confidence and authority to make the call, right?
Yeah.
No one knows how they want the program built. How do they prioritize risk? What does the first 90 days look like? Okay, maybe they know that, but they certainly don't know the first 180 days. We ask candidates or you ask clients all the time, like, what does success look like in 6 months? Like, specifically, like, walk me through each component of the org chart and tell me what success. And they're like, we don't want to be hacked. I'm like, that's not an answer, right? Like, come up with a better answer, because my candidates that I'm going to show you are professional risk mitigators and they're professional storytellers, and it's not going to fly. You're going to get turned down after. So how serious do they take recruiting, or excuse me, leadership for recruiting for the security role is huge, right? And again, not a shot to recruiters. Recruiting is hard, but security leadership recruiting is super specialized. Most companies have done it once or twice, and they try to put the CISO search specifically in a box with every other search in the company. I'm like, it's not the same thing. I don't know how to tell you, it's not the same thing. You have the wrong expectations, you have the wrong comp, you have the wrong location focus, you have the wrong reporting structure, you made the wrong mandates, right? Like, so it's just one thing after another.
I appreciate that. There's another subtext there for those that are in a search or working with recruiters. There's the recruiter part of it, is this the right recruiter? But then there's also when they are going into the interviews, a lot of times that direction of those questions is 90% from the company to the interviewer. And there only is like 10 or 20% that's in there for the interviewer to ask questions for the prospect to be asking this potential employer. And I think that's where you got to slow things down, like when you're in that process. Because again, I was just listening to one of Lenny's podcasts, and he was talking about, he had a guest on, Jacob, I forget his name, but he was talking about the information asymmetry that exists between the company and the interviewer. And you've really got to slow things down to understand the company itself. And like you said, to understand when you're talking to multiple different leaders and you're interviewing, do they have the same view on what this role is? Because if you're asking questions and you're getting, you said across 7 different rounds, you're getting 7 different answers, you might be walking into an absolute minefield, which then leads back to what we were talking about, which is, assessing the technical depth of a candidate seems like that's one small thing. But if you're the candidate that's interviewing, part of it is also figuring out what are you walking into. And so I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, and I always said this publicly. CISOs are also menches, right? Menches, like someone that's so helpful to others that they'll actually put themselves last and go help whatever the problem is, right? Like really good people. And so like, I can fix this. I can fix these guys. Like, just give me a shot. Just put me in, coach, right? Like, so, and they get that. And it's by the way, it's one of the reasons we don't use resumes, right? Like resumes are a crutch for interviewers, right? You're looking, okay, where is it that he or she has done these things all in sequence to make sure that they could be at the scale and appropriate. And sometimes the story is like where the candidate came from a company brand perspective. You'd be like, oh yeah, they definitely went through that. But then like individually, were they involved in that? So we haven't used resumes in a decade, right? We tell stories, we do storyboards, and we interview all of the executives. We understand the stories behind them, the challenges, the obstacles, where they're going to be, what their story is today, what's going to be tomorrow, how they're going to get there, what's the funding, everything. And then we compare that to the candidate stories, right? Like where they were, how did they get there? What did it start? Where did it end? What's the product? Let me see the product. And then we're like, okay, now I can say, Matt genuinely has been through what you've been through or what you're about to go through, and he can guide you, he can navigate you. Here's the evidence. Boom. Not go figure out the scavenger hunt on his resume that says that there's a bullet point that might be the evidence and then waste another 45 minutes trying to figure it out. Here's the succinct story. We're telling it to you. There's no reason not to sit here and talk about. Now you can bring him in and start learning about him if he's a cultural match, if he's a experiential match, right? Like we've already told you the stories. The match is there, right? Let's do the hard part for you. Now you got to figure out if this is going to work. Like, do you like him? So anyway, those are some things that we look at.
So one of the things I pulled out from the report, and this kind of caught my attention, was you asked around AI governance. You asked a question around that. Only 2% said that AI governance was optimized, which really is not that shocking, given that what I call the AI revolution really started in the enterprise only in the last 3 years. Like what are hiring managers looking for from security leaders? Yeah.
And keep in mind from my earlier comment that, like, in my opinion, the AI data that we captured in this report, while really cool, is already out of date, right? So it's probably not 2%. It's probably a lot higher, maybe 10, 12, I don't know. But we're going to do it again. And also the other thing is every board deck in America has an AI slide now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's talking about what they're doing for AI governance. I think it's 57% of private companies and 67% of public companies claim that they're aligned with NIST AI RMF, right? So, but when you dig in, only less than 25% have anything resembling a repeatable process around AI compliance, right? When you honestly ask those, it's a checkbox adoption, right? They've read the framework, maybe they've mapped it a slide, they have a Slack channel that basically talks about, okay, every process we have, but there's no operational maturity behind it yet, right? And it's getting worse, right? It's getting worse because AI is speeding up as far as a productivity tool and an offensive and defensive security tool. So what we found was even more scary than the 2%, Matt, was that I think it was, what was the number? It was like 60+% of security organizations had no plans of hiring an AI security specialist as a leader. That is scary.
Or on the job.
It's like, hey, here's this new thing that could like help us or crush us, but we're going to use our existing resources, or we're not even going to invest in our existing resources again. We're just not going to hire it at all. We're just going to go about it, and hopefully it just goes away and it won't be a problem. And I'm like, wow, right? Because I could tell you the adversaries are not thinking that way, right? So the entire threat landscape has shifted. Model manipulation, AI supply chain risk, and prompt injections, and all the, not hiring and not following the hiring is really scary. We're just starting to see some of our first, larger financial institutions calling and saying, yep, this is a big problem. We need to bring AI in as an architectural discussion, reporting to the CISO. And so that's kind of cool, but they're all developing it at one time. We're happy to walk them through it. I actually think the half is glass full on this one. I think that the E-suite is recognized from the pandemic and everything that the CISO has gone through, that the CISO is really the only one in the organization from a product process, people perspective that actually could narrate how to make sense of everything going on with AI. And I actually think this is very much a golden era for CISOs.
So there's a tension that I'm trying to understand, right? On one hand, there's some workforce data that came out from ISC Squared that's saying that AI is now the number one skills gap in security. But then on the other hand, we're seeing signs that AI is flattening hiring, it's reducing the need for certain roles. My question is AI creating more demand for talent, or is it actually compressing the workforce? What are you seeing?
Yeah. Wow, that's a good one. Good question. I think ultimately it's going to create more demand for talent. I think that even leading up to AI, the constraint for technical talent and operational talent in security was not budget related. It was finding people who actually could do the work. Right? And I think that I think we're in a phase right now where AI is without a doubt pressing the workforce, but it's a phase. It's hard to look in when you're in the phase and say, this is good. And I actually do think it will get worse before it gets better for some people and some positions. But look, again, I'm a history nut, right? So I'm going to go back in history. I started when there was this thing called a PMO. By about 2014, it was gone. I started when there was this amazing positions called a business systems analyst that went away overnight because this thing called SaaS basically got rid of them, right? Because now you went directly to the business and said, oh, your salespeople can now manage the sales force, and your marketing people can. You don't need a business systems analyst. SaaS, you didn't hear any news articles about that. But you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of people lost their current job and moved into something else, right? And look, agents will replace, but productivity will catch up. Is kind of the way that I look at it. There's never been a time in history ever where as humans, we've figured out a level of innovation that didn't become more of a productivity outcome for humans. But there's always been an adjustment period, always.
Well, I love that you're tracking next-gen talent. And in fact, you guys don't just track it, you're calling it out as one of your 6 strategic imperatives for this year.
Oh, yeah.
The thing that's really cool, maybe not cool, I don't know, I thought it was interesting, is that you're seeing next-gen compensation outpace CISO growth, right? Which implies that execution talent is getting harder to find, right? So I'm curious though, in actual searches, where are companies struggling most? Is it developing the internal successors? Is it finding external leaders who can bridge strategy and execution? What does that look like in the context of next gen?
Yeah. So a couple things going on here, and I've really tried to dig into this, and I'm still learning, like, okay, this trend, looking back in history and saying, okay, how did this work with historical things, right? How did this work with the business systems, the business applications folks that became CIOs, right? The application security folks that became CISOs, and ProdSec became CISOs, the compliance folks that became CISOs. Like, where is the history in this? What the market's telling us right now is that execution capability is now more valuable, or at least as valuable as executive presence. So people that actually can build and operate are getting paid like CISOs. In fact, sometimes more, right? We have deputy product security levels that are well over the million mark, multiple million marks. Whereas the CISO growth for a CISO overall has been 3 to 4%. It's been flat in the public space, and private has gone up about 3 or 4%, right? Not earth shattering. Whereas total compensation for the next gens is 6 to 10%, right? And that's
Wow.
And by the way, that's a lower number in our survey, right? We don't have anywhere near as many next gen leaders in their comp level, because they're still trying to figure out if they should trust us. So totally understandable, folks. But yeah, I mean, the year over year growth. And so whereas the CISO is very strategic, board fluency and risk translation and vendor oversight, and growth was slowing, this next generation of technical, next gen AI, cloud, detection engineering, the premium pace stubs are there. We're seeing two distinct career paths here, and they're emerging. The biggest problem I see right now is we're in a succession crisis. 80% of CISOs that we talked to that are new CISOs were new because they were given a battlefield promotion. And that may sound cool, but then we get a call, or one of my competitors gets a call, like, hey, we're looking to replace our CISO. And it goes like that. And we're like, okay, that's interesting, because we've been mentoring your CISO for the last 6 months. So, and they're like, oh, really? They're like, what have you noticed? We're like, well, we noticed that there's been no training. There's been no board preparation. There's been no connection with the board, connection with the audit team. It's just been basically whack-a-mole, and that they're frustrated. And they're like, that's interesting. That's the same reason why we're frustrated. And we're like, great. So what are you guys doing about it? Because paying us a bunch of money to go do a retained search is not your fix. I mean, it could be if that's the way you want to approach it. But remember my story. I have to go tell that to the market. And everyone knows the person that's in this role. And they're a really great person, and they're really great in the community. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to tell a much better story than, well, the last guy didn't work out. Because we didn't get, and because they're going to be like, well, you didn't give him any training. So what are you going to give me? And so we have to tell that story. We turned down a number of searches because of that. It's just like, well, everyone's into this instant gratification thing. And overnight, someone that was a director of AppSec or GRC should suddenly know everything in 2 weeks. It's like, that's not how the world works.
It does not work like that.
It does not work that way. And by the way, you're killing someone's career, because now they're going to have a little blip of like, why weren't you the one that was chosen? They had no, it's like, come on, folks. So we always say, like, hey, if you're ready to have the hard conversation with that person, that's great. We're not going to go start the search until you have the hard conversation. We would prefer that you try to make a save here and make that person the incumbent. And we'll help you get there. We'll actually put an advisor as part of the search. We'll put a very, very senior advisor, you guys pay for them, to help that person get to the level you need them to very quickly, and we'll identify the gaps, instead of you hiring us to go build a brand new pipeline of candidates. And that's just being aware of what the market is going to build, and knowing that this next gen person that's coming has so much more runway than anyone else I can put in there. You just need to give them a chance. So that's the way I'd see it.
When you meet strong next gen leaders, because you're constantly out, like you said, you still travel a lot, which means you're meeting a ton of people. What actually differentiates them from the pack?
They know their material very well, but they struggle with telling their own story around how they know their material, or how it will affect the business. And that's just time in the seat, right? They've been focused on something for 90% of their career or recent career, and they're just not getting a chance to put all the pieces together to tell the right narrative to multiple audiences. We call it yo-yoing, where you have a yo-yo and you let it down, gravity takes place, and then you recoil it up, right? That muscle memory has to be, you start here, you have a plan, it goes to the bottom, and you have another plan and you bring it back up, right? Versus it just I'm a terrible yo-yoer. So it just stays down there, right?
Me too.
And but the next gen folks haven't learned how to yo-yo yet. They haven't been. It's not their fault. They just haven't been put in those situations. So I think that's probably the most glaring thing. It's not that they are too technical and they don't know how to speak, and you hear all these stories. That's not really what's going on. It's just they haven't been put in the seat long enough. And by the way, some of them don't want to do that. They need a voice box or a narrator. Sometimes it's better to just pair them up with some other type of CISO, right? That's a solution, by the way. It's not a solution that's popular with clients because they have to go make 2 hires, but it is a solution, right? And you might, instead of getting rid of the amazing technical talent that you have, try to figure out how to harness and partner that person with someone else that's going to make them as a team equally effective. So that's probably the biggest thing I see.
It sounds like the differentiator is if someone's listening, they're not a CISO, maybe they're not even a deputy CISO yet, right? But they're looking to make that move. It sounds like you're saying the ones that can stand out are the ones who know how to articulate the value that they provide. Is that?
Yeah, the ones that can codify the message and narrate their stories in a way that multiple audiences can take value out of it are the ones that usually stand out. And my message, by the way, to any CISOs listening is, look, you made it. And yes, you're still working on your career and advancement. And I'm not saying that your career is over by any stretch, but you have an obligation to ensure that next generation is enabled, is empowered, and is able to learn. And you give every effort of a succession plan, putting them in situations where you go on vacation for a week or 2 and they have to run things on purpose by design. Put them in front of the audit team and say, instead of you, right? And one thing I do find about CISOs is very few of them have egos. So this shouldn't be a big ask for CISOs, but we're never going to get there if we just continue to run 1,000 miles an hour through the wall and just say, I got it. And just let me know when, you have to do it as a team. You have to put your deputies, senior managers, directors, deputies, whatever it is, in situations that are super uncomfortable. It's the only way they're going to learn, and you have to do it quickly. So
I've been in that. I've been in that scenario. I've been in that. Yeah. I've been in that myself where when I was more earlier in my career, where I had a leader I worked for, and 20 minutes before me, and they're like, hey, Matt, I need you to run this. And I was like, well, I can't do it. Right. But you start to build that muscle. Like the first 2 or 3 times that they ask you to present before a committee and you only have an hour or a couple hours to you start to build that muscle. And I think that's something for the CISOs that are listening, or it doesn't actually matter what level of leadership you're in. If you have a team, giving your team, someone on that team, you should know them like a coach knows their players. Like it is on you to develop them. And one of the ways you do that is you let them share the spotlight, right? And yes, there's the risk that maybe they won't do it as well as you. And they probably won't do it as well as you, but that's how they learn. Absolutely.
I coach girls basketball. It's like one of the highlights of my life. And I can walk down the bench and be like, hey, see what that girl, see what she just did? I need you to go in and do that next time. And they'd be like, yes, coach. And be like, that's the worst way to coach. It's like, okay, everyone see what they did. Now go in there and do that. And by the way, I don't expect perfection. I actually expect you to mess it up. So, because then you'll know what it feels like to, God, it wasn't that easy. Right. But no, I think the CISOs are doing a great job. I think they're tired. I think they're stressed, but I also think they need to find their inner empowerment, their inner mission to help these. That's why we're doing these next gen CISO. Not to mean a plug, but the whole concept behind them is let's go get some luminaries from the industry that show like, this is how I got there. This is the obstacles I ran into. Tell stories, very casual, no vendor influence, no pitches, nothing, no sales, and just tell stories and get people over the line on wanting to be CISOs. When we ask next generation, level leaders if they want to be a CISO, I'd say a good 30 or 40% of them are like, hell no. Like that job looks like it sucks. I'll watch what Matt goes through. I don't want to be like Matt. I want to be fun. I want to go to Burning Man, man. I want to do things. I totally get it, right? But it is a good job. And I think we need to work together as a community to get everyone there.
Well, Mike, this has been it's been fascinating. There's still a lot more in the report. We encourage the link to the report in the show notes.
Thank you.
But this has been super exciting. Thank you for kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit, talking to us about the recruiting process. I think this will, take this transcript, put it in a GPT, use it to help prepare for your next interview. Mike, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more, please visit us at cloudsecuritytoday.com.